Now, I have to admit, my views on these things are pretty radical. I don't think they're radical, but people think they're radical, that anyone, that I should allow that much freedom. People think freedom is destructive and corrosive. But I don't. Now, I see here you have some incredible warnings on the cigarettes about impotence and all kinds of things. It's really funny, actually. But I don't mind warnings. I think people ignore them. I don't like that they're mandated. But I think government has a responsibility to make sure that people are transparent about what they're doing, so that when you voluntarily engage in some kind of activity, that you know what the stakes are. I can understand that as well. I think the nanny state starts when you begin coercing citizens, when you take that next step from transparency to coercion. I think that is the nanny state, and those things happen all the time. Now, I also don't believe in the drug war. I believe that people should be able to ingest anything they want voluntarily. I don't believe in bans on prostitution, because all these things are ignored. Anyway, so they create a gigantic cost on society. And I think the same thing will happen with smoking. The cost to society from the huge regulatory burden of it will be more costly than the smoking itself in society. I believe that to be true. Because quite often the argument that's made is that it costs us so much money. But there's another aspect to this, I think. When you ban trans fats, the government has the right in the United States to ban an ingredient. It's a silly thing because there's so many unhealthy ingredients. It's not poison, trans fats. I think trans fats make things taste good, makes donuts taste good, cakes taste good, lets them have longer shelf life. So in essence, if you don't overdo it, I'm not sure what the big deal is. But there was a famous case in the Supreme Court a long time ago in the United States where there was a movie playing called The Lovers. It was a French movie, and some religious groups sued because they said it was pornography. Now, for the time, it was, probably pretty borderline. Today, it's nothing. But the judge said it wasn't. The head judge of the Supreme Court said it wasn't. And he was asked, well, why? How do you know? What's the distinction between pornography and simply, an erotic movie? And he said, a very famous American saying now, I know it when I see it. Sometimes you just know what kind of law is ridiculous and what is, and what is reasonable and what isn't. I know it's not a very scientific way to look at the world, but when I see someone ban trans fats in one city, I think that qualifies as you know it when you see it. Where I live recently in Colorado, they banned tag. I don't know, it's a game kids play where you touch each other and run because one child was hurt. It's just, I know it when I see it. Now, I wrote this book a few years ago, and I was not a fan of President Bush. I thought he was a big government, Republican right-winger. And I really don't like President Obama because I just think he's codified the worst parts of the nanny state. He's created 15,000 new consumer laws in his first 2 years. He created safety laws that create tremendous burden on companies in the name of nannyistic endeavors. Banning, sending out agents, 1,000 agents that go check swimming pools to see if the covers aren't correctly because one child was sucked into one of these drains in a pool. Now there's 1,000 agents in the United States that go around checking to see if these things work. Is it worth the cost? I don't think it's worth the cost because we can never protect everyone, and that's the utopian ideal of the nannyist. They believe that everyone should be protected. They attack serials for false advertising, and they attack commercialism all the time. And that's an assault on freedom of expression, which is, to me, because of what I do, just unforgivable. Many times we see unsavory political speech and we run to defend it because we understand that the minority in that case needs protection. But when it comes to commercialized speech, commercials, to allow cigarette companies and alcohol companies to have advertising on TV, we ban it, which seems to me a complete assault on the First Amendment of the US Constitution, the right to free speech. Simply because we don't like cigarettes or we don't like alcohol means that we can ban them from even talking to the public. That's an infringement on the most, what Americans hold most sacred, even though I don't think it's the most sacred right we have. I think economic freedom is more important than freedom of expression, because I have freedom of expression, but nothing I say ever comes true in the United States. So I can yell and yell and yell. Without the other freedoms, that freedom is not, I'm not saying it's not important. I know this is what the conference is about, but I'm just saying there are other freedoms that are very important that come with it. And I'll say a few more things, then I hope we can talk, but I wanted to also talk about the reason, another reason that democracy allows us to erode freedom in this way is because we play on the emotions of people. We always want to help the poor people, and we all want to help the poor people, but it's much harder to make the argument that they need less protection or less guidance than more. And the other one is the children. Almost every nannyistic law starts with the children, in the United States at least. And this infests our lives and creates children who think that there's no risk in life or that there shouldn't be any risk in life. I'm 41 years old, and when I grew up in New York, we had playgrounds with metal on it, and concrete that you fell on, and you learned that you get hurt, that you can act irresponsibly, but there are consequences to acting. And when I moved, I have 2 young daughters, and when I moved to my new neighborhood in Denver from New York, I took them to the playground, and the playground was padded with soft, spongy things. My kids couldn't get even hurt if they wanted to. That's a little bit our fault because it's a very litigious society. If a kid gets hurt, we sue the whole city, right away and all that stuff. But we're creating risk-averse children. We believe in risk-averse economies. We believe in risk-averse children, and I think that that's also corroding what entrepreneurship and the right sorts of attitudes in children.
In the end, I lost again. We weren't allowed to do it because there's a group in America called Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which win every battle because their name of the group is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and how could anyone of sane mind oppose such a group, right? I do. I think that they're constantly assaulting the Constitution. In the United States, they can pull you over, the police put up a barricade and check to see if you've been drinking. Everyone, even people who haven't done anything wrong. To me, this is an infringement on my rights to move around freely. I've done nothing wrong. Sometimes in the United States, it seems that and I agree with these people, we seem more concerned about the rights of terror suspects, in Guantanamo, and I'm not saying I'm being tortured or anything, than we do about our own places for the same reasons. Emphasis on safety all the time. Now, obviously there are tragedies quite often with drinking and driving, but those people really don't care. They don't care that you have more laws. So these are the sorts of things that I think infringe on us in ways that we don't always realize. Simply because of political correctness, no one wants to stand against Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Nobody wants to protect cigarette companies, right? No one wants to protect an oil company. But those are people who deserve the same rights as anyone else, even if I don't like what they're doing. I'll give you an example. In the United States, money is considered speech. Because if I'm at work all day and I don't have time to write a column, then I give money to someone who will speak for me. But in the United States, we limit how much money you can give, almost all in many, many ways, which I think is an assault on free speech simply because we don't like the people who are giving money. I think this is justified earlier in the nanny state, where we pick the winners and losers, the moral and the immoral. We tax some people, we don't tax others. We don't treat people equally on how the elite view their actions. I would say, though, that I'm very skeptical that it's going to get any better because laws are often enacted but almost never rescinded. In the United States, there was a crafty politician who came up with the idea that every time you pass a law, you should have to take something off the books because they never get rid of anything. They pile up and they pile up and they pile up, and they create regulatory burdens, and companies suffer and people, I think, suffer. But what's happened since President Obama became president, who's coming here, I was joking that he's following me around, that guy, but I've been very critical of him. I'm sure he doesn't read me or care, but because he is the Uber nanny. He believes, in my estimation, that that people don't have free will, in a sense, that you can't, if there's a commercial on for bad food, or bad foods for your kids, you can't resist that commercial. You can't. It's not your fault that you're eating and becoming out of shape or unhealthy. It's the corporation's company who sells you the bad food. So he goes after them. They shut down their commercials. They institute policies with such heavy regulations, for instance, on television, that tells you that you have to have Spanish programming or educational programming or programs for kids that teach them certain things, that you regulate them to such an extent that it's, and I'm using this in a soft way, not in the angry way, but like fascism almost. You have such control over corporations sometimes that you can, in essence, tell them how they should act with people. And when you buy into those corporations, as we did with General Motors, for instance, you make them do environmentally friendly things that maybe don't make sense. You build a certain kind of car. You make them do things. It's social engineering on a huge level. And that's what nannyism is. It's social engineering. It doesn't work. And it has terrible, I think in the long run, terrible repercussions and corrosions of freedom. But it is I don't know how to, it's the training wheels of something much more evil. And because I think nannyists probably have good intentions, clearly, but the end game is terrible. So I just wanted to lay out what my thoughts were on it, but I wanted to answer questions and talk about what you guys are thinking about here in Brazil and elsewhere, and to see if we can talk. Does anyone have a question? No?